podcast. I'm Emily Schoolfield, and I'm so grateful to have you listening with me today on this Monday morning. I'm very excited to say that I have another guest on the show, Annie Napier, and we're going to be covering the topic of goals, and not just setting the goals, but completing them, because that's a whole nother story, right? So today specifically, I want to talk about this. Annie's not yet a mom, but she's definitely preparing her heart and very excited for the season to come. But I don't think there's any reason that we can't gain wisdom from her. I mean, being a married woman, Annie, I'm sure you can attest you have learned lots this year. And I know you have lots of wisdom to give, so I'm very grateful to have you. And specifically for the mom side of thing, side hustle has been a really big deal to me because when I first had Val, life was pretty full and I had a lot of stuff going on, which was great. And then around the 6-month mark, she kind of became a little more independent. And then it was me staring at a 6-month-old play on the floor for 24 hours a day, and it gets a little old really fast. So with that time, I kind of went back to my priority structure, which I've spoken about in episodes prior, and noticed that I had a lot of free time that I could be using for other things, and that's kind of how this podcast came along, and this is what I call my side hustle. I also was doing a little bit of work with Annie's mom actually prior, but I've started to kind of limit myself with this next season coming because come September, I have no idea, again, what my schedule is going to look like. So it changes with every season, but that's why it's so nice to have your own side hustle that you kind of have control over because it can fold and bend with you as you need it to do. So Annie, I'm really happy to have you here, and you are someone who for the last, 4 years I've known you, have had many side hustles and many goals that you have set, and you have many gifts in different areas. And so I really wanted to have you on here because I want moms to know that they have tons of opportunities, right? It's not just one thing that you can do or maybe one job that you can find remotely, but it's all these different things that you can make within your own home. So can you share just a little bit about kind of what your projects have been lately and what you've been working on at home?
Yeah, let's see. At the end of 2022, I started my web design business, so that's been slowly growing over time. And then I also just love painting. I love like all the craft hobbies, I feel like. I just thoroughly enjoy doing those all the time. And then I've also lately, one of my goals has been working on my health. I've had a lot of health issues over the past couple of years, so that's something that I definitely want to kind of talk about because it actually felt like more of a setback in some ways for me. But now that I've actually set it as a goal and something that I want to nourish, there's just a lot of things I've learned in the past year with different things I've been working through with all the other goals. Because another really big goal that's a little bit like, I think probably going to be later in life, I hope not too late, but that's to be a screenwriter and work in film. And so that's something I'm also just slowly working towards. And amongst all those things, having a family, and that being the main priority for my husband and I beyond the things that I might want to do, career or other skills. And so it's interesting, like preparing my heart for that, preparing my health for any of the things I'm going to do because you want to be healthy. And yeah, so I'm somebody that's just very, like, I think they call it multi-passionate or just having lots of things. Sometimes it turns into jack of all trades, which can be hard because it's like, oh, I have this one goal, but it's like, I'm so like, oh, I love doing this. I want to do this. And so reining myself in to do the things that are prioritized in certain seasons can actually sometimes be hard for my personality, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah,
absolutely. And I love that you discussed too that, your health kind of becoming something that took away your ability to take on all these hobbies and do these things. You've changed into something that's more goal oriented to grow in these hobbies. And I think you'll definitely get into that more as we keep talking. And I just love that you shared that. I wanted to share before we kind of get into the specifics of how you set your goals, specifically what the Bible says to us. Whether moms or just women or just Christians, on how we are to set goals. And that's with wisdom and humility, because it's so easy to go out there and be like, yes, I want to do it all. I want to, get all these things done. But God definitely tells us to be careful too, to not be too distracted by our goals or our endeavors outside of, just kind of what we're called to. So one verse that I did really want to point out first is Proverbs 21:5, which says, "The plan of the diligent lead to profit, and surely as haste leads to poverty. So I think that's a really great verse, just kind of explaining the two sides to a goal, right? How if you try to pull too much or try to do too much, it doesn't always lead to good. Being exhausted and exhausting yourselves in the things that you try to do isn't always going to be for the Lord, always be profitable. And that's one place where you need to be wise in those decisions that you make. And I think as a mom, I've definitely been challenged on those things, because everything that I could do when I was single or even just, a wife, I can't do that now. But I try to tell myself, like, yeah, absolutely. If I, kick it in high gear and I do this, this, and this, then I can make it happen. But then I see in other areas of my life where, Val's exhausted at the end of the day because mom's been busy all day and she's been having to play by herself and she just wants to be held. And then I have other things that are going on, that it's just very easy to get distracted in the goal without recognizing everything else that kind of gets taken from in order to make that happen. But again, the diligence of being number one, in line with your priority structure, and number two, being an organized person in the way that you do accomplish these things, and making sure that this is something that's adding to your life and not necessarily taking from it, which I think your health, as you shared, is one really great example of that. So just looking at that one verse specifically, did you have any comments or notes on how that has been a part of your walk in this goal setting journey and accomplishment journey?
Yeah, I think it's definitely hard. So being that multi-passionate personality, that means I can easily become paralyzed by like, wait, why was I doing this? Because now I'm excited about this thing, or I'm excited about this thing. And I think there's like the general, like people say, oh, like if you have a goal, like break it down to smaller steps. And that's like a really great, it's fantastic. It's a great like practical, like, yeah, take your goal, break it down into small steps. It's a very practical surface thing. But I think sometimes in our diligence of doing our goals, we see that as just the task maker of what that means. But I think we also need to be diligent in our why, like why we're doing that. And so I think when we're preparing those goals and we're praying about them and we're submitting them to the Lord, that means we're also submitting ourselves to whatever desire He's placed in our heart for why we're doing that. And so I actually do this thing where it's like I go 5 whys deep and I review them, and I review myself, and I review if that goal is ultimately bringing me closer to Jesus and everything that I'm doing and however He may have called me. And so that is asking yourselves like, okay, why do I want to do this? And that's like the first like layer. Okay, I want to be in film. Big dream, because I do think that they need people who know the Lord in film. Obviously, there's a lot of craziness there, and I think that they need a lot of light. So that's one. It's like, okay, second layer, why do I want to be in film? Like, what is my, like, sometimes even selfish desire of why I want to do that? Sometimes it's an honest desire of, oh, I love to tell stories and I want to tell stories that matter. And then I go deeper. Okay, I want to tell stories that matter. Why do I want to tell those stories that matter? Is the end result of how I want to feel about it to be validated? And so, because sometimes I think we can forget to review ourselves where our hearts are at. And I think that also can depict how we go about things. It will depend on oh, maybe we're not actually being diligent in the actual tasks of it because we're afraid of projection or afraid of man. And then we get discouraged where we become afraid. And I don't think we should be walking in fear in our goals either. And I think that goes even in smaller goals, our fear of not wanting to be seen, but we're supposed to be lights on the hill. And I think especially like being stay at home and working from home, it can be really easy to want to hide. And so it's like, I think being diligent and not just the things that God's given us, but in the person of ourselves that He's given us, that is being asked to walk closer with Him every day in everything that we do. I think diligence especially is in who we are, the person that we are, who He's growing us to be in our goals. Because sometimes we got to stop and we got to take a breath because we're getting too caught up in our own human nature, which is not inherently good without Him. And I think we need to come back to that and get close to Him. Yeah. So I think that's something that in goal keeping, it's like, oh, I need to do this goal. I need to do these steps. And then we forget that it's about Him first.
No, absolutely. And I can say to that, I'm a very black and white person, as you know. So when it comes to me making task lists, I love checking the boxes. And when I get a box checked, like it is my adrenaline high for the week.
Yes.
Like I'm like, all right, I got it done. This is great. And so for me, when I set a goal, even if my heart's in the right place when I kind of start it, once I break it down into those task lists, there's not much heart to the task, right? I'm just kind of getting it done. And then I'm like, yes, this feels great. Okay, next. And I get so caught up in the doing of it that I kind of lose sight, number one, of why I'm doing it in the first place.
Yeah.
And number two, continuing to have God be a part of it. Because when I feel confident in myself, I don't need to lean on anyone else. I don't need to rely on any other help. And so I think those questions that you asked in the beginning are just so great. And I think that's something that we should all use as a plan of setting goals, because not only should this be set in the beginning, but revisited constantly, because the ability to accomplish these goals, it really does come from him in all assets of life. I think that's one thing I'm just constantly relearning. And it's a great reminder is how, like, he's just knitted into everything. It's not just one decision that I make one day of, oh, I'm going to become a Christian today. And great, now he gets to walk with me forever. It's no, and the ins and outs of my life, and the smalls and the bigs, and in all these moments, he is just so present, and it's really a gift. And I love that you're able to do all these things and be so aware just of his presence, because it really grounds you so much more when he's a part of everything, versus just kind of thinking, oh yeah, I just need to read my Bible this morning and then cool, I got my Jesus for the day. Because it doesn't last very long. So no, I love that you shared that. Another verse that I did find that I wanted to share is James 4:13-14. And it says, now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why do you not even know what will happen tomorrow? What is your life? What are the mists that appear for a little while and then vanish? And I love this verse because, again, talking about the overconfidence, I believe James in this verse is talking to the business people about their confidence levels and how they're very haughty and, oh yes, I can just show up this day and I'll make some money, or I can just make this happen, and just becoming a little overly arrogant in what they're doing, right? And not understanding the gift that it is that they've been given to be able to do these things, or even the profit that they've been given, and that it doesn't come from just their actions. Do you think there are times when, I don't want to word this correctly because I don't want you to feel like, oh yes, here are my sins. That's not what I want to do. But there are times when maybe you get caught up more in the reward versus just kind of what you're doing it for?
Yes. I think that's going back to that why, like asking myself, why am I doing this? And yeah, because it leads us on the hard days, whether we are caught up in realizing that we're being extremely prideful in our capabilities, because I think that we're all really capable, really gifted. When we have the Lord and he's leading us, he opens doors for us. And I think, yeah, we're just naturally going to presume that this is our doing, that we did this, that we did that. And thankfully, there's been a lot of times in my life where the Lord has really disciplined me in letting certain desires that I thought I wanted to be fulfilled, and then finding that they were not actually what I wanted or what I needed, and almost not safe for me in person or physically. And so there's things like that where it's like we don't actually know what we want. The Lord is the one that really knows what our hearts want. And so that's the pride aspect that I think we want to be diligent in laying down before his feet and be like, Lord, like, take my pride, like, take me, and really embracing humility, because humility is actually one of the safest places that we can be. The safest place that you can be in your character and in your person is to be humble, because that is where the most work that God will do in your heart. And not only that, but we need accountability, because I think I actually tend to be more on the side of very discouraged, and I definitely have a tendency to depression. Some of that is some of the health stuff, just different like hormone things I'm working with, just my female body doing its thing and having other things that affected that. But I need accountability. And my husband has been one of the greatest accountability partners I've ever had. Like he reminds me of my why. He reminds me of the goals in the sense of like the tasks that need to be done. reminding me to be diligent, but also reminding me to be diligent in my heart and how I see myself. Um, I think sometimes even not just managing our pride, but also managing our discouragement or our despair when a goal is not going out or panning out how we want it to be. I think that's just important, and it's really not talked about, because I think discouragement, we're just like, oh, like that's just something that you feel, and then, but once you get like a little high because you finish something or whatever, you can feel better. And that's really not the case. I think that we can be just as like choosing to despair as we are choosing to be prideful. And especially for somebody who may be very passionate and fiery, I know I am, I can be super stubborn and I'm going to get this goal done. And that's great. That's a great like part of my personality. But that also means I can be super stubborn about being discouraged and being depressed. And so me having to humble myself to receive the accountability from my husband or a friend, like that is equally just important to recognize in myself, because he can be a great factor of my character and personality and in the things that God's called me, and can also be a great stumbling block for myself.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it goes both ways.
Yes.
I would say, what's the Enneagram test? When Cade and I first met, I rolled my eyes, but he's like, hey, let's do this personality test. I was like, okay, whatever. And so we figured out what our numbers were, and I loved how it showed both sides, right? One was, okay, here is what your personality, here's what your personality is like, and here's where it's going to come out in your strengths. So it's like, oh, cool, this is great. Like, these are all really good positives. And that also shows you, okay, here's where it's going to come out in your faults. And it's like, oh, or your weaknesses.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, there are two sides to it. And again, I think, like you've been talking about, that's one reason why it's so important to be diligent and held accountable and all those things, because it's very easy to sway from one to the other, and your personality is going to be your personality on either side.
Yep, it's true.
But
yeah.
And with the pride, that was reminding me of Cade. He was talking the other day about some goal that he wanted to set or something that needed to happen. I was like, okay, cool. Like, how are we making this happen? He's like, well, I don't want to tell anybody about it. And I was kind of like, what? Like, what does that mean? But he brought up a really interesting point to me, which was how he gets so caught up in the explaining of what he wants to get done that he almost gets that high that he would get from just completing it. And sometimes it'll actually set him back, because he'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go run this half marathon and go do this, this, and this. And you're like, wow, that sounds great. That sounds so cool. And in his head, he's imagining what it would feel like to do that. And so then as time goes on, he's kind of already had that high, and he's like, well, I'll get to it eventually, And that's one thing that I've kind of been thinking on, that I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I feel like I do that as well. When there are things I want to do, I kind of think about how cool it would be to complete. And then I talk about it so much that I'm like, yeah, everybody's on board. This is great. That I don't even need to do it. And that is one way that pride and just that feeling of like, yes, comes in and can be a distraction, definitely, when it comes to achieving a goal.
I totally relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun to talk about. And I think that also, I mean, it has pros and cons, right? It gets you hyped up to do it. But yeah, it can just kind of take away from that drive, because you got what you needed up front, and you're like, cool, I feel good right now. I'll let you know when I'm off cloud 9, and then I'll actually do it.
Exactly.
But
yeah, and that could be just as hard, because I think that also can lead to that discouragement if it's like, oh, I'm like, I can tell people, but I can't follow through. And I think sometimes we're very prone to be disappointed in ourselves more than we realize. So yeah, I think being diligent in showing up, even if it's not something that anybody else sees, that's something that I'm definitely learning in small ways. And because I've always just been around people, and so being at home and doing my business from home, we don't really have a second car right now, and that's totally fine. I've actually healed a lot and been able to really reflect on a lot of those things, like, oh, like I maybe need to believe in myself a little more than I realized. And that's actually a good thing. And yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like there's so many nuances that really go to like who we are and how close we are to Jesus, or how we are trying to be close to Jesus or not, than we realize.
Yeah, no, I think that's been one of my favorite parts, specifically about this podcast, right, is I've had a couple guests now, but then also being able to talk to people who just kind of message me outside of it, and being able to hear other people's stories and their perspective on things. You just learn so much not
Mm-hmm.
only about them, but also about yourself. I think
Yeah.
that that's one thing I was really surprised about with this whole project, because originally I was like, yeah, I'm going to talk to other women. I'm going to make friends. Like, that's my goal. I want to build a community of good people that I'm excited to spend time with, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But then I feel like God's been showing me a lot about myself
Yeah.
and really challenging me on things with every topic that I go to. And I think that's one of the really cool gifts that are given to us when it comes to seeking the Lord and seeking all these, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry. All these desires that he's given us. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I really truly believe that being a wife and being a mom is a desire that he gave to me, and the fact that he's fulfilled those makes it an even greater gift to me.
Mm-hmm.
But again, as I pursued those desires, finding a husband was no easy task, right? That was a
Yeah.
goal too. I mean, it was in the background, it wasn't the majority of my life. Um, but working within that, every goal that I've ever set and every goal that I've ever either completed or not completed, I feel like has brought me closer to God,
Mm-hmm.
because he's had to be so involved in all of it and taught me so much about myself. And I think that's one thing that gets kind of brushed over or not necessarily noticed when you set a goal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, when you just get so focused on what the goal itself is. For me, you know, something as simple as just painting one afternoon because Val's taking a nap and I have some time
Yeah.
to finish that. I mean, it takes a couple days to getting back to. It's something that you have to tell yourself, okay, I got to get back to it now.
Mm-hmm.
But something as simple as that, just being in quiet time and just focused on that, I feel like are just such cool, unique experiences to each person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I love that you're here sharing yours as well, because nobody's going to experience something like you do. And yeah, it's a fun topic for me. So I love it.
Yeah,
So
no,
let's keep
same.
going.
Yeah. Yeah, I was definitely a little bit
um,
intimidated at first because I was like, right now my goal is really working on my health. And at first that had felt like a setback because it really was stopping me from being able to run my business as well as I could be, just because I would get like rashes on my face. Like I really had a rough past year with that. Um, but I think that's another thing, like goals really do shift and go with seasons. It doesn't mean they have to stop, but sometimes they need a pause, or sometimes the tasks need to be even smaller than what feels like moves us forward. Um, and for me, it really has been like, okay, everything has to kind of be like money I'm making, savings is going to my health right now and paying for the supplements, paying to work with a nutritionist. Um, I'm definitely seeing the results already, but it's still something that's a slow process that's just not always obvious. Um, and yeah, it's just really interesting, like when we actually choose to dedicate to just one thing for a time. Um, and I think that will actually sometimes take us further than we realize. Because if I'm not working on my health, like one of the priorities, because I want to help support my body to have healthy babies sometime, hopefully no later than 2 years from now. um, and I
Nobody's
can't
counting down,
depict
but
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I can't depict those things. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen. It could happen sooner, and I trust God with that. But I think He's definitely asking me to take care of my body, because whether it's having kids or wanting to be in a certain industry or building my business, I really can't do all those things quite as well as I could be if my body is not functioning well. And so I'm really thankful because God knows what we need when. And really, He brought the nutritionist at the right time. And it's time when I had a little set aside where I can dedicate it to that. So I think that's another aspect of it. It's like it's okay to let goals shift and grow with us, also in a part of our season. And it's okay to shift directions a little bit, because sometimes that path might be easier than if we just trudged ahead with just what we think we need or what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, that's where our strength comes from, right? We just
Mm-hmm.
got to keep relying on God because we are very human.
Yes.
And it shows.
Yes.
Well, my next question for you, I don't know if you kind of already answered it, but was just what have been the biggest pitfalls or struggle with achieving a goal?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you have anything else to add to that or if that was kind of.
Yeah. I mean, really, it's managing that discouragement when it comes. I think, yes, sometimes it's ourselves, just maybe where our weaknesses are. I know for myself it is, because I do have that tendency to be discouraged and then I'm depressed. Some of that was a little bit out of my control with the health stuff, like I've mentioned. But I think also the enemy is going to do whatever he can to discourage us. And I think discouragement and despair is one of the easiest weapons of his, because they're things that feel like they're just related to ourselves, or they feel justified. Like, oh, well, I can wallow, I can despair because this didn't go the way I planned. I've been working so hard on this, or I've been dedicating so much time and I have nothing to show for it. And like all these things can sometimes feel justified in our heads, when I really do think that despairing is actually just choosing not to hope. And the Lord asks us to hope, and he asks us to hope in him. And so I think sometimes surrendering that and being like, okay, Lord, like, this is what I'm hearing. This is how it feels justified. What do you say about my situation? What do you say about me? Why am I discouraged? Why am I choosing to be discouraged? Because sometimes it could be from, maybe it's a pattern that we saw in our families, and that is how our parents responded to things that didn't go well. And so I think sometimes we imitate what we've seen, we imitate what we know. And I think especially in our culture today, like complaining, being discouraged, depressed, just being meh about life all the time is almost like acceptable. And it's okay to not just be like totally crazy, passionate, on fire every day. I think we're going to get tired. We're going to get tired doing that. But I do think that in our times of waiting, or in our times of just moving slowly, that we want to be diligent in managing our discouragement, or the things that we're going to despair over, or the things that we're going to be, what's the word? Just frustrated even, which can sometimes, I know for myself, can usually manifest like, oh, I'm super angry about things. Like I go to anger. I know they say that's usually like Romango, but I'm a person like, my emotions will sometimes show up as anger first, and then I'll be like, oh, I'm just really sad right now, or oh, I'm disappointed. And so I think also like questioning, okay, why am I responding this way? Like it really, like, I'm very much a layers person. Like let's just like walk ourselves through the layers, because the Lord is also so merciful and so loving, and he will walk that with us, even when we're not optimal, even when we're not perfect, even when we're not super feeling courageous or excited or happy or joyful. Which even joy, like that's being aware of his grace, like being aware of his grace all the time, and it's around us all the time. It's always for us all the time. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of layers to it. But yeah, I would say my biggest thing that I've been working through has been the discouragement, the despairing, and not letting culture or the enemy or even myself or things that in the past I've seen dictate where I choose to stand, even if it's because I'm not going anywhere in the moment in my goals, whatever I think that looks like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I want to say too, to all the stay-at-home moms and maybe just married women or single women who are listening, that if this sounds like a lot to you, right, having a side hustle and you're already like, oh my gosh, I'm drowning, why on earth are we adding hobbies? It's not possible. To number one, just remind you that everything happens in a season, right? So my season right now has been very laid back, thankfully, but I see it coming. You know, I'm about to move, I'm about to have another baby, and I'm kind of like, okay, well, next season's going to be completely different. So just to give you kind of some hope, if you're maybe at home with that newborn right now and you're like, oh my goodness, people want more of these, or how on earth am I going to do this on top of this? And I mean, last week we talked about the Proverbs 31 woman, and there's just so much wisdom in that. And I'm going to tell you again, I encourage you to go back and read that. But I think it's also great to revisit Proverbs 31 to see that we are called to not only be mothers and homemakers, but we have the ability, and we're called to have these side hustles, you know, to be diligent in our time, to divide it out and make this priority list. And as a mom running a home, it's a lot. It's a big task list. But I also want you to kind of look into yourself and acknowledge, you know, am I in a situation where I feel like I'm bored or I could do more? Am I in a situation where maybe I need to take a step back and kind of take some things off of my plate? And I think all the things that Annie has shared today have shown, you know, how you can have a goal and you can work through it. And there are a lot of things that you can do to overcome these obstacles, but also to recognize in yourself when maybe the obstacle in front of you is not coming from God, but coming from yourself. Maybe it's something that you just need to lean on him more to be able to achieve, but then also to recognize that maybe the obstacle is something that's being put in your way because God's like, hey, come back. This isn't where I want you to go. This isn't what I need you to do. So to recognize how that's going to be different in every person. But also don't be discouraged in those moments if you have goals that you've set that you don't want to do. Like Annie said, maybe that's not what you really want. Maybe it's just what you think you want right now, because God knows so much better, right? He's already written your story. You're just living it out. And so, yes, he gives us that free will, and that's something that we can be so grateful in. But he also gives us the guidebook, so we don't have to figure it out alone. We don't have to do it alone, but we have the ability to make our choices within these things that he has set for us, within these gifts that he's given us, and within these abilities. So always have that in the back of your mind when you're setting a goal. I mean, I can give you the stereotypical don't bite off more than you can chew, because we've all been there. But just some great reminders when it comes to setting the goals and knowing that you can complete it. And so many moms that I talk to, I know, get kind of stuck in this rut of I'm a mom now. That's my definition, right? That's my defining factor. And we know that's not true. On the episode we did about worth, we know that our worth is in God, and he's given us so much more than we can see. And whenever you feel like you're stuck in that rut, definitely seek him and seek guidance from others to help you see those things, and know that you can be so much more, I guess, than you would call just a mom, with all these things that are around you. And just have an open mind and feel like you can seek those things. Don't feel stuck in wherever you are. And Annie, I don't know if you have anything else to add today regarding goals, or anything you want to say before we finish up here.
Yeah, I mean, not really. I think just remember, Jesus loves you. That sounds cliche, and I think we don't always want to hear, because especially if you grew up in, going to church, grew up Christian, you're just like, oh yeah, Jesus loves me, great. It's like, no, that is the most...
Yeah, that was the first song I learned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is the most powerful thing in this world. Jesus' love and his love for us. And the most amazing thing that I think we can do is love him and worship him and glorify him. And I think that when we make that part of our lives, whether it is letting him heal us, going into the nitty-gritty of who we are, what we've been through, and then who he is making us, like the new creation, or just resting in him, resting in his presence, I really do think that is, like, in spite of all the things we could be doing, that is the thing that we'll be doing into eternity. And that starts right now. And I really believe that. So yeah, Jesus loves us, and we get to love him. And that is, yeah, one of the most defining, powerful things I think that we can bring through our entire lives.
No, absolutely. And that, I can just say again, is such a great reminder. I talk about this a lot, but there are so many moms I know who just feel very stuck. And I think, honestly, just boiling it down to that Jesus does love you is just the best type of hope you could give to any mom that just feels locked in or separated from all of those around her. So yeah. No, I think that's great. But that's kind of what I have as far for goals. If you guys have any questions or maybe topics you want to dive in deeper in next episodes, just let me know. Like I said, my comment section, and I check my Instagram all the time. So some of you do message me, and if others want to message me as well, we can always check that out. But thank you so much for joining us this Monday, and I'm excited to see you next week.